It's the 2022 World Cup. It's France's players.
Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. And today we will be looking at France's squad for the 2022 World Cup.
Right, and this preamble is actually going to be the same for every mediacast we do for the Players Series. So those familiar with it can jump ahead, I would say about 3.5 minutes to where we begin talking about France. And for YouTube watchers, there's a timestamp toward the bottom of the show notes that you can actually click on to go directly to that point. For the audio cast, just the times are in the show notes.
For those looking for a quick version of this, you can skip to near the end of the media cast, the last, what would we say, 10
minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, where we summarize the likely starters. Just prior to that, with about 20 minutes remaining, we'll have some discussion on the squad. The main issues with the squad, how we see their overall strength, and how they look going into the Cup, as well as the players and issues to look out for. We'll put these times in the show notes. We'll also be editing the media cast into a shorter version of this podcast for those who are just looking for an overview.
Right, and for those looking for a deeper dive, you've come to the right place. We go through the players and how likely they are to make it to the final squad, and we explain why we think so and give some information on their history and standing with the squad. So the way we do this is by organizing the players into their designated positions. So it should be noted that these are a bit artificial since players don't always play in the position that they're coded for, but it's nevertheless a good way to organize the discussion.
Then we go through the players and share some of the data we've collected in our files, and using that data, try to predict how likely the player is to make the team based mostly on their recent participation. We categorize them into definite, likely, possible but unlikely, and seems to be off the squad. We also mention big players who recently retired and make note of any who are currently injured. We'll also try to determine which players will be starters and which substitutes.
Right, and that starters and substitute section comes right at the end there. For those following on YouTube, we have a very simple graphic running where we list the names, so you can actually see the spelling of the players' names. And this is the same broadcast for the podcast. So because you can't see the names, we're going to try to repeat them a few times to help listeners familiarize themselves with the players' names.
So that's as much as we can do at this point. But as the rosters are being published, we'll do an update episode. That will essentially be going over our predictions, updating them based on the games played to that point, and revealing which players were selected. So keep your eye out for those, probably in November.
Yeah, probably mid-November, and we're going to do a team and players update there. So let's move on to talking about France specifically. We're going to start with takeaways from previous podcasts we've done. So we did a team series before the Euro Cup in 2021 there, and we also did a team podcast for their Group D for this World Cup. And what did we learn there, Connor?
So first is no outstanding leader.
Yeah, this isn't really an issue. Just we noted that for their other strong periods, there was kind of one character that was outstanding. So Jules Fontaine around 1960 and Zinedine Zidane around 2000. So for this squad, they've done well, probably a fourth strong period, but there's no kind of one identifiable figure. Would you say so, Connor?
Yeah, I would agree. And the names you mentioned, also Michel Platini in the 80s.
Yeah.
Kind of a feature of France, but not quite the case now.
Yeah. We also noted, this was in the recent podcast, that they were doing quite poorly in the 2022-23 Nations League.
Yeah, we noted that they were off to a poor start in the team preview for this tournament, and we'll also see how it played out at the end.
Right. And the third takeaway we have from the podcast is, go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, is that France is characterized by periods of strength and weakness.
Yeah, so in recent years, in past years, they were kind of had weak periods in between their strong periods. We said that's not really true this time, but they have been a bit flat. And there's also been kind of some catastrophic tournaments, which include actually poor tournaments after good results. So they won the World Cup in 1998, but were knocked out in the group stage in 2002, and they reached the finals in 2006, but were quite poor in 2010. So I guess they would be hoping to avoid that here, Connor.
Yeah, the defending champion, sometimes going with a lot of confidence, but for France, it might actually be it's kind of a worrying omen looking at their history.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the formations that they have been using over the past little period. And the period we're examining is basically from the Euro Cup until now, until June 2020. Actually, it was a bit awkward with France here because we're doing this podcast after the September games, which is not the case for most of the teams that we're covering in this series for the player review. But in this case, we looked at the September games, so that comes into the discussion a little bit here. But anyway, let's look back to the Euro Cup. And do you see any pattern there in the formation?
Euro Cup, they predominantly used 4 at the back, and then kind of mixed up the midfield. But three up top was what they used on 2 of the occasions.
Yeah, I mean, quite mixed there. So for the first 2 games, they had 3 forwards, and then 1, and then 2. So a bit hard to pin down, actually. Let's see if a pattern developed over the next series of games, which was their World Cup qualifying, just the second half, I guess, of World Cup qualifying.
Yeah, and they used a 4-3-3 in their first 2 games, and then switched to a 3-4-1-2 system for the remaining 3.
Yeah. Okay, and then we had actually the 2021 Nations League final games there, so just 2 games.
Yeah, and they stuck with what they've been using, the 3-4-1-2, so seemed kind of settled on that at that time.
Right, and then the last set was in June, the Nations League games, but we've included the September games here too.
So it was a little bit mixed, but the 3-4-1-2 was used in 3 of their 6 games. The other games, they put 4 defenders. So I guess overall, the 3-4-1-2 seems to be the preferred formation, but there is some variation.
Yeah, a couple of things to keep in mind here. One is that there was a lot of variation, especially you'll see when we start going through the players in those Nations League games. And at least part of the reason for that would have been that they've been struggling with a lot of injuries. So maybe the formation changed because of the players available to them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have sometimes 3 at the back and sometimes 4. That's about half and half, would you say?
Yeah, roughly, I would say half and half that they're using the 3 or 4.
Yeah, and then anywhere between 1 and 3 forwards. But yeah, and really no pattern there. I guess you'd say predominantly 2 in the second half of the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, keep that in mind as we talk about the players, because sometimes the positions and the formations kind of work off of each other. So let's begin with the squad and start talking about the manager. So Didier Deschamps is their manager, and tell us a little bit about him, Connor.
Yeah, he was a former France player and captain. Yeah, quite a legendary player for them. Captain to the World Cup actually in 1998. And as but he's also made a name as a manager. He's I'm just trying to check when he became manager. You may have that.
That was 2012, kind of after the blow up in 2010.
Right. Yeah. So basically a decade now, and he's led them to some good successes during that time.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I hadn't been really conscious that he'd been in for so long.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, all right. Well, he took them through the 2014 World Cup and Euro 2016, and of course the World Cup in 2018, where they won the cup, and 2020 Euro. So that's 4 tournaments under his belt, and this will make it 5 because I doubt they'll change the manager beforehand. All right, well, let's begin with goalkeepers, and we'll just begin by naming the keepers and their likelihood. So we have Alphonse Areola as a definite candidate, and Mike, do you know how to say that? Maignan?
Yeah, Mike Maignan, I think.
Okay, as a definite candidate. However, he is an injury risk, so I'll put him there too. And we have Hugo Lloris, who surprisingly I have as a likely candidate. We'll talk about why that is. And we have Steve Mandanda as a possible candidate, and Benoit Costil as a possible but unlikely candidate. Okay, let's go back and talk about Areola Alphonse. We have him as a definite candidate. He returned actually after a 2-year absence in November 2021, and he started the last 2 of their remaining 10 games, but he was on the bench for 8 others, so he seems kind of a permanent fixture, at least on the bench.
Yeah, even if not starting. He's kind of well-traveled. He currently is with West Ham in England. He spent some time in England with Fulham as well. And before that, he was with PSG. Had a couple loan spells, but was with PSG for about 9 years. So
yeah, Real Madrid and Villarreal before that too. So in terms of tournaments, he was not selected for the 2016 Euro Cup, but he was on the roster for the 2018 World Cup, but didn't see any action in that cup. And as I said, he was returning from a 2-year absence, so wasn't selected for the 2020 Euro Cup. So kind of making his way back into the team here, Connor.
Yeah, even though he's not getting regular football at his club, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I kind of actually wonder what his claim is that he's been brought back and used constantly, because he's not making much of a mark in club soccer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess he was with Paris Saint-Germain until recently. Okay, let's take a look at Mike Maignan. And he started 4 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. I know it's called the 2020 Euro Cup, but it was in 2021, so I'll keep saying that. And started 4 and was on the bench for 8, and otherwise was out with a couple of injuries, including for the last match, which we'll talk about soon.
Yeah, he's a goalkeeper, 27 years old, and he's currently with AC Milan in France, or in Italy, sorry, having had a spell with Lille in France for several years before that.
Yeah, so a bit of a latecomer. His first cap was in 2020, so he only has 5 caps, but now he seems to be quite highly spoken of. However, he was out with a calf injury, but I don't think it's anything to worry about because he's listed as expected to be back in late October. So that might be a bit touch and go, but what do you think?
Yeah, it looks more likely that he'll be healthy so that he will be under consideration.
Yeah, I think France wants him because he's kind of hot right now. Now, we only have Hugo Lloris, who is actually the starter, as a likely candidate. I'm sure he will be there, but he started 10 of their 15 games since the Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 3. However, I have him as just likely because he was not selected, not called up for the last 2 matches.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a minor injury or not. He's been with the team since 2008 and has 139 caps in that time, so an astonishing record. He is 36 years old, but he's still playing regularly at a high level with Tottenham, who he's been with for 10 years now. So yeah, if he's healthy, I expect he would be there.
Yeah, and we won't go through his tournament history in detail, but he's been the captain, I believe, since 2012.
Yeah.
And has been involved as a starter in every one of those tournaments. So it would be quite shocking to see him not make it. Just a minor concern with him not being called up for those last 2 matches. But as you say, probably nothing serious. All right, well, we have a possible candidate in Steve Mandanda, and he didn't start any of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was on the bench for the first 3 of those and the last one. However, there were 11 matches where he wasn't called up, so we only have him as possible.
Yeah, he has 34 caps. So of all the goalkeepers other than Hugo Lloris, that's the most of the others we're talking about. But yeah, not being called up, I think, does call his spot into question. He's also a year older than Hugo Lloris, 37, so it does seem to be coming towards the end of his playing career. He is currently with Rennes in France.
Right, and he's actually been around, as you say, for longer than Hugo Lloris. He was on the bench for the 2008 Euro Cup, and basically for every tournament after that. He did get a game in the 2018 World Cup, but otherwise was on the bench all the time. So all of his other caps are basically non-tournament games. Okay, finally we have Benoit Costil as a possible but not likely, and he returned after an 11-month absence in October 2021. Didn't start any of the 12 games that were remaining, but he was on the bench for 4 of them. However, for the last 8 matches, he hasn't been called up.
Yeah, he's also advanced in years at 35 years old. He currently is with Auxerre in France, having spent the last 5 years with Bordeaux. And he just has 1 cap to his name so far.
Yeah, and has always had a bit of trouble making it onto the squad. The only tournament he was in was Euro 2016, where he was on the bench but wasn't selected for the 2018 World Cup or Euro 2020. So pretty doubtful that he'll be here. All right, well, we're going to finish each section here with a kind of a little summary of how the position has played out over the period we're talking about. And then maybe, Connor, you can make a comment on the last 2 games just recently here at the in September.
Sure.
Right. So, but in terms of the position on the whole, it's quite simple. It was Hugo Lloris in the cup, starting all games, and in World Cup qualifying, and in those 2 Nations League final games. However, in the Nations League, I think he started the first 2 games, or he at least played 2 of them. But Maignan came in, and it's been different in September as well, too, right?
Yeah, Maignan played the first game but was subbed out. Areola came in and then played the second game as well.
All right. So in all, Maignan played 3 of the 6 games and Areola 1 of them. So that's why we had a little bit of doubt about Lloris as the keeper. But who knows whether they were resting him or he had a niggle, as you say.
And actually, just to correct, it was Areola who started the first game. And then Maignan started the second, and then Areola came in. So I just had the order reversed there.
And I think that actually accounts for Maignan's injury. Got injured in the game that he started. All right, let's move on to defenders. So we'll begin with central defenders here, and maybe Connor, if you want to kind of name the players and their likelihood.
Sure. So in center defense, we have in the definite category, we have Jules Koundé. We have William Saliba. And then in the likely category, yeah, we have Lucas Hernandez and Prenel Kimpembe, as well as Raphael Varane. And then in the possible category, we have Deo Upamecano and Benoit Badiashile. And then as well, we have Ibrahim Konate. And then continuing on, in the possible but unlikely, we have Kurt Zouma. And then in the seems to be off the squad, we have two names here, Clement Longley, as well as Samuel Mtiti.
Right, so that is a massive pile of names and a bit of an issue for France, as we'll see. And I'll actually just touch on that issue here because four of these players are a bit of an injury risk here, so maybe that's why they have so many. Jules Koundé, we're going to actually update the injury situation at the end. We have Lucas Hernandez on the as an injury risk, Pernell Kimpembe, and Ibrahima Konate. So four of those players from possible or up, kind of at injury risks. So kind of a lot to talk about here. So let's begin with Jules Koundé. And we have him as a definite because he started 8 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. And he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. He was also suspended for 2 and then injured for the last one with an Achilles tendon problem.
Yeah, he's spent the last few years of his career in Spain, first with Sevilla and then with Barcelona, who he joined this summer. And he has 12 caps for the national team. He's also just 24 years old.
Right, so he just got his first cap in 2021 there, but he nevertheless was part of the Euro Cup squad, and he appeared just in game 3 there, and seems to have worked his way into the squad since then. So a definite candidate in Jules Koundé. William Saliba got his first cap in March 2022, so quite recently, and he started 4 of their remaining 8 games and was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1.
Yeah, he's with Arsenal. He's been there for a couple of years and actually had some loan spells to France before that, but he's just 21 years old. So a young player who seems to have established himself kind of relatively recently.
Yeah, he seems to kind of be hot for Arsenal right now, but he was called up before this good period. Lucas Hernandez, I usually see him actually as a left defender, and he was a left back in all 7 games of the 2018 World Cup. But several of my sources have him coded as a central defender, and that's where he's been playing most of his starts recently. But he only did start 4 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 5, and he was injured for the last 2 with a torn muscle bundle. So another injury risk.
Yeah, he's currently with Bayern Munich, where he's been since 2019. He was with Atletico Madrid before that, and has 32 caps to his name. So a decent number, and like you said, involved in all 7 games in the last World Cup.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll move on to Pernell Kimpembe. So Pernell Kimpembe started 7 of their 15 games since the Euro Cup in 2021. He was on the bench for 4, but he was out with 2 separate injuries for 3 games, including the last 2 with a hamstring injury. Uh-oh, that sounds a bit long-term, Connor.
Yeah, that could be trouble. Yeah, he's plays for PSG. One of a couple players to play for PSG. Has 28 caps, is 27 years old, but started and finished all their games in Euro 2020, so has been an important player for them.
Yeah, he was actually on the squad also for the 2018 World Cup, but he only appeared in game 3. That was kind of a B-team game because they had already secured passage, and as you say, a starter in Euro 2020. So kind of making good inroads into the squad, but this injury might interrupt that. All right, we move down to the last likely candidate, and that is Raphael Varane, and he started 8 of their 15 games, usually towards the first half of the period we're covering now. He was on the bench for 2 and injured for 2, and not selected for 3.
Yeah, he's 29 years old. He spent a decade with Real Madrid before moving to Manchester United in 2021, where he's had a few injury concerns. But he has 87 caps for France since making his debut in 2013. So
Yeah,
that's quite a lot.
yeah, quite a lot. He was a starter on the 2014 World Cup squad, and he was selected in 2016, but he was injured, so seems to be a bit injury prone. But he was back for the 2018 World Cup and the Euro 2020, where he started and finished all the games as a central defender in both of those. So an important player for them, but maybe kind of drifting off the team a little bit. But as you say, maybe struggling with injuries. Okay, we move on to the possible players. So Deo Upamecano, excuse me, he had returned, having been unavailable for more than half the games due to injuries, and he returned after a 12-month absence in October 2021 to start three, including the last one of their remaining 12 games. And he was subbed in for one and on the bench for two, but not selected for 6 of those 12 games.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag there. He's kind of stepped up from Red Bull Salzburg to Red Bull Leipzig in Germany, and since 2021 he's been with Bayern Munich. So again, good pedigree. 6 caps to his name since 2020.
Right, and the 24-year-old hasn't participated in a tournament so far, so he'll be hoping to make this World Cup his first. And we'll move on to Benoit Badiashile. So he actually got his first cap just recently in September 2022, but he did start both of those games.
Yeah, interesting. So that's the last 2 Nations League games. So that's why we have him in our possible candidate. Yeah, he plays for Monaco in the French league. 21 years old, and like you said, just those 2 caps.
Right. So again, he may be coming in to replace injured players there. So very hard to say with France having so many injuries. The last possible candidate we have is Ibrahima Konate. So he got his first appearance recently as well. That was in June 2022. And he started 2 of their remaining 5 games and was on the bench for 1. However, he was out with a knee injury for the recent 2 games in September.
Yeah, he was also at Red Bull Leipzig in Germany, but has been with Liverpool since the summer. But yeah, I guess his first team opportunities have been a bit restricted, and now the injury for the last 2 matches doesn't help his cause, unfortunately.
Yeah. So again, maybe a player who was kind of brought in to cover injuries. We'll really have to see how that turns out. However, a player who seems to be on the way out is Kurt Zuma. He started 3 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was on the bench for 3, but not selected for 10 others, including the last 8.
Yeah, he's actually getting regular playing time now with West Ham United, which hasn't always been the case in his career. He had 11 caps from 2015 to 2021, but like you said, hasn't been involved as much recently. So that's why we have it as possible, but unlikely, like you said, seems to be on his way out.
Yeah, and did he ever kind of nail down a starting position in his 7 years with Chelsea?
Not really, which is why it was good for him. I know he had a couple loan moves. He had some starting positions at some of his loan clubs, but never really broke into that Chelsea team.
Yeah, well, never really broke into France either. He was around since the 2014 World Cup, actually. He was on a 7-man standby squad for that. And a knee injury kept him out of Euro 2016. But the World Cup 2018 squad, just plumb wasn't chosen. Or actually, no, he was on a 11-man standby squad for that one too. So really always on the edge. He finally got his first tournament for the Euro 2020. But he was on the bench for the whole time. So, and not even on the bench for game 2 there. So talk about a guy on the edge of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And now he seems to be kind of drifting off the team. So whether he'll ever get his chance is open to question. And we have a couple of players who seem to be off the squad, maybe an outside chance of them getting back in, because most of these who we have in this category have appeared for the team since at least 2020. And we start with Clement Lenglet, and he didn't start any of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3. However, he wasn't selected for 10, including the last 8 matches.
Yeah, he did appear in one game in Euro 2021, but like you said, not involved since then. His current club is Barcelona, but he moved to Tottenham this summer on loan, so that's where he's playing currently.
Yeah, he was with Sevilla before that. Wow, you're a pretty rich team when you can kind of leave guys with that pedigree off the team, eh?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, similarly, Samuel Umtiti has been left off the team. Even though he scored one of their goals in the first half of qualifying, he last appeared for the national team on the bench in September 2019. Tell us a little bit about him. He kind of came in quickly and went out quickly.
Yeah, he's been with Barcelona as well since 2016, but like Lenglet, has been loaned out this season. He's been loaned to Lecce in Italy. Prior to that, he was with Lyon in France. So again, good pedigree, but no appearances since 2019.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but Lecce is not one of the bigger teams in Italy.
No, it's not. They're a team that has even bounced up and down between Serie A and Serie B. So
right. Okay, well, as I said, Umtiti kind of came in quickly in 2016. He was part of the Euro 2016 squad. He didn't appear in games 1 to 4, but then got starting position for the last 3 games. So, looked like he was kind of really on the squad, especially in 2018, where he finished all 7 games except the B team game, the B team game, which was game 3. But then, as suddenly he kind of left the squad, and no sign of him since September 2019.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is probably as many players as we ever had in one category, and I'll talk a bit about the situation in central defense, even though it's a bit complex. But it wasn't at the beginning. Kimpembe and Varane played as a pairing in the cup, and Lenglet joined in for 1 game there when they had a 3-man back line in the last game. And then it was still Kimpembe and Varane in the first game of World Cup qualifying, with Zuma joining in. But suddenly in game 4, they put out a whole new backline, 3-man backline with Koundé, Upamenko, and Lucas Hernandez. And it just got more and more mixed after that. Zuma came in for Hernandez. Rafael Varane had kind of been off the team in World Cup qualifying, but he returned for the Nations League final games as the center of the 3-man central defense. And Koundé was there twice, and Hernandez and Kimpembe showed up. And then in the Nations League, again, this may partly be due to injury, but in game 2 of the Nations League, Saliba was introduced, and it was really mixed until the end. Even as for up until September, with Badiashile introduced for the last 2 games, alongside 4 different selections over those 2 games. So very undecided in central defense. What do you make of it, Connor?
Very hard to wrap your head around it. I'm sure injuries have their part, but it's just been a revolving door of players, even changing in systems. France have a lot of players they can call on, but they'll want to be more settled than they are going into the World Cup.
Yeah, as you say, like injuries kind of explain some of it, but to me it's a bit worrying for them to be mixing and matching so close, because a lot of teams don't have more than a couple of friendlies scheduled between now and their first World Cup game. All right. Well, moving on to left backs, we blessedly have just three candidates here. Do you want to take us through them, Connor?
Sure. So first we have Luca Dean in our definite category. In our likely category, we have Theo Hernandez. And in possible category, we have Furlan Mendy.
Right, and just a couple of notes there. We have an injury risk both with Luca Dean and with Theo Hernandez, not to be mixed up with Lucas Hernandez, who's also played as left back. And so we'll have to see how things work out here. But let's start talking about Lucas Dean. He started 6 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but was on the bench for 6 others. However, he was out with an ankle injury for the last 2 games, so a definite candidate there, but an injury risk.
Yeah, he has 46 caps since 2014, but has kind of been in and out of the squad kind of during that time. He currently plays for Aston Villa in England, moving over from Everton. He spent several seasons there. Before he was with Barcelona and PSG, actually, in his younger days.
Yeah, good pedigree, as with many of the French players here. He first appeared tournament-wise in the World Cup 2014, only in the B team game there. And in 2016, he was on the roster but didn't see any action. In 2018, for the World Cup, he wasn't selected. And if you recall, in 2020, Connor, he started game 2 and then subbed into game 3 at halftime, but then got injured just 6 minutes in. A bit of a mysterious injury there.
Yeah, very strange and unfortunate, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think he was like clipped by another player or something. Do you remember much about that?
I don't remember it offhand. I remember the incident of him being just on very shortly, but no, I don't remember the exact.
Yeah, I may be wrong, but I don't think he was caught by another player. I think he just maybe stepped funnily or something. Anyway, so between injuries and non-selection, he's always kind of been on the edge. But he looked like he was a candidate for this cup until another injury, an ankle injury, puts him at risk. And we'll update those injuries at the end of the podcast. But similarly, Theo Hernandez is an injury risk. He got his first appearance on the bench in September 2021, and he started 7 of their remaining 15 games, on the bench for 6, and again injured for the last 2 matches.
Yeah, he's 25 years old. He did spend some time with Real Madrid, which included some loan spells, but he's been with AC Milan in Italy since 2019.
Right, and so doesn't have any tournament experience, so this will be his first if he is selected, and that depends on his fitness. Meanwhile, again, I think Furlan Mendy has probably been called up because of the injuries of those 2 players. He returned after an 18-month absence, where he himself was injured for most of that time, but he returned in September 2022, so just recently, and started both of those games.
Yeah, and he's currently with Real Madrid. He's 27 years old and just has 8 France caps to his names. So not that many given his age, but he is playing obviously with a very good club.
Yeah, so he did have 6 caps before these 2 games in September, so it's not a stranger to the French team. However, he is a stranger to tournaments with France because he hasn't been involved. 2020 was really the only one he would have been eligible for, but he wasn't selected. However, fortune may turn its generous face to him here if these 2 players remain injured. So let's just summarize the left-back situation. In the Cup, it was Theo Hernandez twice and Digne once. But the position wasn't used for the last game. And in fact, if you look at the formations, a lot of times there isn't a left back, but rather a left winger. And the left back often pushes up to play the left winger role, especially on the left. So it was Digne twice in the World Cup qualifications, as a winger one of those times, and Theo Hernandez twice as a winger. In World Cup qualification, sorry, I think I'm talking about Nations League there. Digne twice, basically Digne and Hernandez have shared the position until September 2022 when they were both injured and Mendy came in. He came in as a left winger. All right. How about in September? Okay. I guess I just gave it away there.
Yeah. Ferland Mendy was there because of the injuries to the other two.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I kind of stole your lines there. All right. Well, let's move on to the right side. And do you want to take us through the candidates there?
Yeah. So we don't have anyone in the definite category, but we do have in the likely Benjamin Pavard and Jonathan Klaus. In possible but unlikely, we have Leo Dubois. And then in seems to be off the team, we have Nordi Mukiele.
All right, well, let's take a look at those. Maybe fans will be surprised that we have Pavard just as a likely candidate. But in fact, he started only 5 of the 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 3. He was injured for 2, but not called up for 3 games.
Yeah, he spent a lot of his recent career in Germany, first with Stuttgart and currently with Bayern Munich. He has 45 caps to his name, 2 goals, including one that I think was the goal of the tournament in the 2018 World Cup, where he started and finished all 7 games, except for a B-team game in Game 3.
Yeah, he was also a starter in 2020 Euro Cup. Again, all the games except for Game 3 there also, but not playing so much since that Euro Cup.
Yeah.
The next one is Jonathan, and it's not actually Jonathan Klaus who's replacing him. It's rather central defender Koundé that's moving over to the left side. Jonathan Klaus himself got his first cap in March 2022, and he started 2 of their remaining 8 games. But he subbed in for 4 and was on the bench for 2 others. So we have him as likely because ever since his first call up, he's been on the squad for all 8 games.
Yeah, a late bloomer as he's 30 years old and like you said, was only called up recently. He currently plays for Marseille in France.
Right. Okay. And again, it's really Koundé challenging for the position more than Jonathan Klaus, who's a substitute. We move on to Leo Dubois. And in fact, even though he's coded as a right defender, when he has appeared, it was usually as a defensive midfielder. I even think he played as an attacking midfielder once, but never as a right back. He started 3 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1. However, we have him as possible but unlikely because he was not called up for the last 8 matches.
Yeah, he currently plays for Galatasaray in Turkey, having spent his earlier part of his career with Lyon and Nantes in France. Has 13 caps all since 2019, but is also a little bit older at 28 years old.
Right, and Euro 2020 was his first tournament. He was on the roster but didn't see any action there. And the last candidate is Nordi Mukiele. And we have him as seemingly off the squad. He just kind of popped up in September 2021 and earned his first and only cap there, but hasn't been called up since.
Yeah, he's 25 years old, so not a fresh youngster. Currently with PSG, having played with Leipzig before that.
Yeah, and again, I probably put him on the list here largely because of that. Pedigree. Okay, so let's look back then at the right back position and summarize what's been happening over there. So Pavard was in the cup, again, kind of alternating between being a right back and a right winger, depending on the formation. And Koundé stepped in, the central defender there. to play right back once in the Cup and in the first World Cup qualifying game. And then Dubois came in, and actually right midfielder Kingsley Coman played the position once. So basically after Pavard lost the position, it's been a bunch of different players. Pavard actually did return for the Nations League finals there and played 3 of the Nations League games in June. But Coman, Koundé and Klaus all took positions there once. So it seems to be kind of Pavard losing the position, other players being tried out in the position, and Pavard kind of getting it back. How about in September, just to clarify?
Well, that's kind of consistent with what we saw in September. Klaus had the position in the first game, and then Pavard got it back in the second.
There we go. Okay. Right, so let us move on to the midfield then. Defenders are finished, and we begin with defensive midfielders. We only have 2 candidates here. Do you want to tell us who they are?
Yeah, so as a definite candidate, we have Aurelien Tchouameni. And then as a possible candidate, we have Boubacar Kamara.
Right, and I should note that Boubacar Kamara is an injury risk also, so I'll put him in the injured category as well. And let's begin with Aurelien Tchouameni, and he got his first cap in September 2021, so basically right after the Euros there, and started 9 of their remaining 15 games, subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 1 more.
Yeah, so involved quite a bit recently. He's just 22 years old. He's currently with Real Madrid, having moved there from Monaco this summer.
Wow, the club affiliations of these French players is really stunning. Okay, so Boubacar Kamara got his first cap in June 2022 and started 2 of the remaining 5 games. Subbed in for 1, however, out with a knee injury for the last 2 matches, the September games.
Yeah, a bit of an injury risk. Those are his only caps, and he currently is with Aston Villa, moving there this summer from Marseille.
Right, how old is he?
He's just 23 years old, so
yeah,
on the younger side.
A lot of these new players are quite young. Okay, those are defensive midfielders, but we're going to group them together with central midfielders since there's often not much, but not a lot of overlap between them. So can you take us through the candidates in the central midfield position?
Yeah, there's quite a few. Indefinite, we have Adrien Rabiot. For likely, we have Paul Pogba. And Matteo Guendouzi. In possible, we have Eduardo Camavinga, N'Golo Kanté, we'll talk about him, Jordan Veretout, and Youssouf Fofana. And then in seems to be off the team is Corentin Tolisso. Fans may remember him.
All right, well, we'll go through those players. Kind of like central defense, we have a lot of candidates in the center and not so many on the outside. So let's start with Adrien Rabiot. He started 8 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. But he was injured with a calf problem for the last 2 games. So yet another injury risk there, Connor.
Yeah, he's another player with good pedigree. He's had a long career with Paris Saint-Germain, but has been with Juventus in Italy since 2019, so some domestic titles under his belt. He has 29 caps since debuting in 2016.
Right. Okay. Well, he was offered a position on the World Cup 2018 squad, but he rejected the offer. And however, he didn't in Euro 2020, so he was a starter there. And yeah, that's the story with Adrien Rabiot. I thought it would be longer, so I kind of was taken by surprise there. Okay, Paul Pogba is well known to a lot of even non-soccer fans, and Paul Pogba started 6 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 1 and out with 2 separate injuries for 4 games, including undergoing knee surgery in September. So not available for those games, but he wasn't selected or wasn't called up for 4 games also.
Yeah, yeah, like you said, people know the name and also probably know him for some kind of off-field stuff as well. He came through the ranks at Man United, then moved to Juventus, where he was wildly successful. Then he went back to Man United, and now is back at Juventus. He does have 91 caps, though, for France in 2013, and 11 goals, and at times has been a huge player for them.
Yeah, pretty hot and cold, actually. He was on the squad ever since the 2014 World Cup. Not always a starter on the squad. Well, actually, for France, most of the time a starter. It's more with his club team that he wasn't on the squad. But yeah, all tournaments since 2014 has basically been a starter, except for the odd game here and there.
Yeah.
Okay, but he was also a bit of an injury risk there with the knee surgery, so we'll have to put him in that category too. And move on to Matteo Guendouzi. So he first appeared on the bench after a 2-year absence in September 2021, and he started 2 of their remaining 14 games, but he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 8 others. So not always on the field, but we have him as likely since he's very regularly called up.
Yeah, he's young. He's a young player, 23 years old. He broke through at Arsenal, but then moved to Marseille, first on loan and then permanently, and has done well for them since.
Yeah, only 6 caps, but as I say, called up more often than that. He's never been involved in a tournament. We move on to the possible candidates, starting with Eduardo Camavinga. And he also returned after an absence, 2 years in his case, returning just recently in September 2022 to start the last of their 2 remaining games and on the bench for the other one.
Yeah, he's a very exciting player, Camavinga. He's 19 years old currently and plays for Real Madrid, and he's actually established himself in that team already. So he's one for the future, but also possibly for the present. 3 caps to his name so far, but many more to come.
Yeah, I mean, especially if injuries open up a position for him. I think he was an outside consideration for the Euro 2020, but didn't make the squad there, but has a much better chance this time compared to 2020.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people will be surprised to see N'Golo Kanté just as a possible candidate here. But that's where we have him because he only started 3 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was on the bench for 2 others. But he was out with 2 separate injuries as well as a bout of coronavirus for 6 games. And he wasn't selected for 4 others, including the last 2.
Yeah, widely regarded as one of the best in the world in the central midfield or central defensive midfield position. But he has had his injuries, injury concerns and illness concerns, like you mentioned. So hasn't even been in the Chelsea squad all that consistently as of late. He's been with Chelsea after moving, of course, there from Leicester, where he helped them win the title in that amazing season for them. And he has 53 caps. He is 30 years old now, but you'd think if he was healthy that he would be there. But the last 15 games kind of tell a story of him mostly not being in the squad.
Yeah, it really kind of comes down to health and possibly even fitness if he comes back. whether his fitness level would be up to make the cut. But of course, as Connor says, a really important central midfielder who was a starter for them since 2016, and he was healthy for all the tournaments, so has played a lot in those tournaments, but maybe a bit at risk here of not making the squad.
Yeah.
Okay, Jordan Veretout is another possible candidate. He got his first cap in September 2021 and started only one of their remaining 15 games, but he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 4, including the last 2 matches.
Yeah, he's currently with Marseille in France. He moved there from Roma, where he actually had 2 spells, with a spell with Fiorentina in between. And he's 29 years old. Just a handful of caps to his name so far. Kind of filling in, I think, with some of the injuries that France has had in this position.
Yeah, 28 years old, so a bit late joining the squad there. Not so for Youssouf Fofana, who is much younger. He got his first cap in September 22, so maybe, as Connor said, filling in for injured players. He started one of their remaining 2 games there and subbed in for the other one.
Yeah, and he's currently with Monaco on the other end of the age spectrum, as you mentioned, just 23 years old.
Right. Okay, and Corentin Tolisso is the player we have in the seems to be off the squad category. He hasn't appeared for the squad since the 2021 Euro Cup.
Yeah, he appeared for them in that tournament, but not since. He was with Bayern Munich for several years, is now with Lyon, having moved there this summer. So, again, really good club affiliations, but no match action since the Euros.
Yeah, I mean, he was a starter for the 2018 World Cup, but he actually lost his starting position in that cup. Started game 1 and was called back to start game 5, but never seems to have really done it for France. In Euro 2020, he was just a sub there, and now not being called up at all. All right, well, again, that's a large number of names, and that may be because players have been injured, but I'll just describe the situation in the central midfield. So this could be one central midfielder in the center, or it could be a pairing. It's a pairing about 2/3 of the time. In the Cup, it was Kanté as the central midfielder, and Pogba came in when it was two central midfielders, and actually one time it was even 3 central midfielders, Griezmann coming in there, but he usually plays further upfield. Rabiot and Tchouaméni made inroads in World Cup qualification, both of them playing at least 3 of those games. And Pogba and Kanté kind of had fewer games. However, it was Pogba twice in the Nations League final, paired with Rabiot and then Tchouaméni. Kanté did return in the Nations League games, but it was really a mix and match there, with Guendouzi and Camara making appearances, each of them getting 2 games, and Fofana and Camavinga each getting 1. So as with central defence, very uncertain at the end with almost all candidates used, but none of them enough for us to guess at who's really a starter. Do you want to just summarise what it looked like in the last couple of games in September?
Yeah, it's been more of the same with the mixing and matching. Tchouaméni started both their September Nations League games, once alongside Fofana and once alongside Camavinga. So 2 players in our possible categories.
You got to think that if Kanté and Pogba are fit to play, that they would come back into the position. Do you think?
I would think so, but yeah, they both have fitness concerns, and of course, neither of them played. So at least France are testing out players, but whether they'll have you would think they're kind of preferred to available, remains to be seen. After that, it's kind of anyone's guess.
Yeah. All right. Well, because we have so many characters in central midfield, we have fewer on the outside. For left midfielders, we have just Ousmane Dembele, and he's only at the possible level. And we have Thomas Lemar, who seems to be off the squad. So Ousmane Dembele returned after a 15-month absence. A lot of those injured during a lot of that time, but he returned in September 2022. He didn't start either of their remaining games there, but he was subbed in for one and on the bench for one.
Yeah, he's kind of had a bit of an inconsistent career with Barcelona, who he's been with for the past 5 years. He does have 28 caps and 4 goals for France, and he's still young, just 25 years old. But yeah, uncertain whether we'll see him in this tournament. And again, club form partly to blame.
Yeah, and never really kind of inserted himself into France deeply. He was a starter in the 2018 World Cup, but he was subbed out 70 minutes in and lost his starting position, appearing again only as a starter in Game 3 and as a substitute in a couple of other games. And in Euro 2020, he subbed into Games 1 and 2. But got injured during that tournament. I think it was in Game 2, so off the squad there. So hasn't really shown up for them in tournaments.
Yeah, kind of, despite a big name and a big club, kind of on the fringes, you would have to say.
Yeah. Well, I guess France can kind of afford that. But wow, it's amazing. Barcelona players just on the fringes there. Thomas Lemar last appeared for the national team in September 2021, so just after the Euro Cup.
Yeah, he's an Atletico Madrid player. He's been there since 2018. He's 27 years old and has 27 caps, all coming in between 2016 and 2021.
Yeah, he was on the squad for 2018 and for the 2020 Euro, but he only got one game in both cases. So again, kind of on the fringes there. And when we'll summarize by just kind of describing the position. And it's actually central midfielders who move over to play this role. Usually Rabiot, when it's a 3-man midfield, he was usually the right central midfielder in the 2 or 4-man formation in the first half. But we saw the variety that came in there in that central midfield position over the second half of the period that we're looking at. So a bit difficult to say. And kind of similar on the right side. Midfielders, although Kingsley Coman has gotten more time than any of the left midfielders. So we have Kingsley Coman as a likely candidate, not always playing as a right midfielder, but usually as a right winger or in the forward line. In fact, he's the only candidate here. He started 5 of their 15 games since the Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2. However, he is also injured. He was injured for 5 matches, including the last 2. So, wow, another player on the injury list, Connor. Oh, Connor, maybe your microphone is off there.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the injury list is getting long, is what I was saying. But yeah, he's 26 years old and currently plays with Bayern Munich in Germany.
Yeah, and with Juventus before that, so a very good resume there too. And he was first called up for the 2016 Euro Cup tournament, and he got a lot of playing time there, but he wasn't exactly a starter. However, he wasn't part of the 2018 World Cup squad, and in 2020 he was just subbed into games 3 and 4, but again, didn't make inroads there.
Yeah, just 20 years old at that Euro 2016, so pretty impressive.
Yeah, but a player who probably should be seeing more tournament time than he has. We'll see how it works out this tournament. and whether his injury gets in the way. But again, in summarizing the position here, it's mostly central midfielders who play in this role. So I think it's Pogba who has played most of the time when it's a 2 or 3 man midfield. And however, Coman does come back and play this role once in a while. In recent times, though, Tchouaméni has been either the right midfielder or the right side of a 2 man central midfield. But we've also seen some variety in this position too, though not as much as in the left midfield role. Okay, well, we'll move on to actual left wingers. And we don't have a lot of candidates here because, as I've said, it's usually the left back on the left and on the right back who push up to play in this position. And we have seen Kingsley Coman sometimes come back on the right side. So the actual players coded as left wingers are few and far between and not very likely to make the squad. So we have Moussa Diaby as a why don't you introduce them, Connor?
Sure, just 2, but Moussa Diaby is possible, and then seems to be off the squad. We have Marcus Thuram.
Right. Sorry. Okay. Moussa Diaby, when he does make it onto the field, he's usually more of a left attacking midfielder. And since his first cap in September 2021, he has started 3 of their remaining 15 games, but he has subbed in for 5 and been on the bench for 5. So I almost wonder if we should move him up to likely, even though he's more of a substitute than a starter.
Yeah. Possibly could do that. 8 caps since 2021 isn't a bad return. He currently plays with Bayer Leverkusen in Germany and is just 23 years old.
Right. And Marcus Thuram, I'm looking forward to Connor telling us a bit about him. He has appeared for the national team. He has not appeared for the national team since the Euro Cup, which he was selected for, but he was a bench player just appearing in 1 game there.
Yeah, he's kind of well-traveled and kind of with some smaller clubs, actually. So Sochaux in France and Guingamp, and then Borussia Mönchengladbach, who aren't, a small club, but not, as big as a lot of the clubs, club affiliation we've seen so far.
Yeah, he's actually son of Lilian Thuram. Do you remember him?
Yeah, he was one of the greats for France. I think even part of the 98 World Cup squad.
Yeah, so I think they had high hopes for his son here. So it's maybe a bit disappointing how it turned out. It looked around 2020 like he was kind of getting onto the squad. And he had made that move to Borussia Mönchengladbach, but seems to not have lived up to the hopes there.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll summarize this position, and again, keeping it short. On the left side, it was always a left back pushing up to play this role, so either Lucas Digne or Theo Hernandez, but none of these... Actually, I'm thinking Moussa Diaby was on the right side rather than the left side. So even though he's coded as a left winger, I think he's actually just played as a right attacking midfielder. And on the left side, it always has been a left back. On the right winger, I might as well do that now because we don't have any players coded as a right winger. And as I've said, Kingsley Coman, the right midfielder, sometimes plays that right wing position. Otherwise, it's a right back pushing up, Benjamin Pavard usually, or possibly Koundé. And when it's a left or right attacking midfield position, usually Griezmann or Moussa Diaby has done it a couple of times, I'm pretty sure, on the right. Maybe you can clarify a bit with the September games there.
Yeah, I mean, the positions of kind of right midfielder, right winger were mostly filled. by defenders, Pavard, Mendy, and Klaus. So kind of using that kind of the system we've seen a lot, the 3-4-1-2 system. In that four, there's kind of two central midfielders and then two wingers, but they're really fullback positions or attacking fullbacks.
Right. Oh, okay. So they haven't used an attacking midfielder recently, because the recent games strike me as kind of one attacking midfielders and two forwards. Was that the case in September?
Oh, sorry. Yes, that was the case. I mean, it's kind of a front three. It's kind of a two forwards with one player just behind is kind of an attacking midfielder.
Yeah.
So it's probably a bit fluid and flexible, but
yeah. Well, we'll pin that down a little bit once we look at forwards, because as you say, it really is kind of attacking midfielders, even when it is a 3-forward line. So we're going to move on to forwards. That includes attacking midfielders and secondary strikers. And we actually don't have a lot of candidates coded in those positions. So I'll just summarize the position. For left and right attacking midfielder, it's usually a forward who plays in the role. We saw actually Moussa Diaby playing as a right attacking midfielder a couple of times. On the left, it's usually Kylian Mbappe, but Coman, actually a right midfielder, has had two turns as a left attacking midfielder or a left forward, and Rabiot and Benzema each played that position once. On the right side, it was Griezmann in the Cup and Tolisso playing, but just once. And that continued into World Cup qualifying. But increasingly, Griezmann played as a central attacking midfielder with a formation of basically that attacking midfielder and two forwards. So no real outside attacking midfielders in that formation. However, Nkunku, the secondary striker who we'll introduce right away, sometimes took the role as the central attacking midfielder, while Griezmann played as the right forward. So let's take a look at Nkunku as one of the secondary strikers. And we have him as a likely candidate. He got his first cap in March 2022 and started 3 of their remaining 8 games, but was subbed in for the 5 others.
Yeah, he's a young striker, kind of sought after, but he's currently with RB Leipzig in Germany since 2019 and was with Paris Saint-Germain before that.
Yeah, so his first cap in 2022, so he hasn't been a part of any squads. But for the most part, we're covering those outside forwards or attacking midfielders by talking about the forwards. So we have kind of a long list here. Do you want to take us through it, Connor?
Yeah, it is a long and impressive list. In definite, we have Karim Benzema, Antoine Griezmann, and Kylian Mbappe. In the likely category, we have Olivier Giroud. In possible, we have Wissam Ben Yedder and Randall Kolo Muani. In possible but unlikely, we have Anthony Martial. And then it seems to be off the squad, we have Jonathan Ikone.
Okay. And among those, Anthony Martial is also an injury doubt. But fortunately, their front line has been fairly healthy. Oh, I spoke too soon because Karim and Benzema also an injury question there, but I don't think it'll leave him out of the cup. We'll talk about that. So let's start with Karim Benzema, and he started 8 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench with 1, and out with 2 separate injuries, including missing the last 2 matches due to injury.
Yeah, he's with Real Madrid, where he's been since 2009, incredibly. He's now 34 years old, or 35, I should say. Has 97 caps for France, 37 goals, incredible records. And despite his age, he's just coming off one of his best seasons ever with Real Madrid. So there's really no signs of him slowing him down. He's been at the top of his game for quite some time.
Yeah, but he's been a bit in and out with France. In 2008, he was part of the Euro Cup squad, and he was a starter there. However, in 2010, he was coming off uh, a poor season with Real Madrid and wasn't selected. And I think there was some kind of a scandal in April 2020 that played into that. But by 2012 Euro Cup, he was back as a starter as well as for the 2014 World Cup. And then he was involved in some kind of a blackmailing scandal. So he was off the team for Euro 2016 and the 2018 World Cup, but roared back in 2020. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, in and out for France, and has also been, part of that 2014 World Cup, which was, not selected for the 2010 World Cup, which I guess was just as well. But he'd been involved in a couple scandals, like you said, that has kind of seen him in and out of the team. Some discipline things too, some disagreement with coaches. It seems that now he's got some of that behind us and is playing well for both club and country. But a bit of a checkered past, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, he has had a couple of good tournaments. I'd say 2014 World Cup, he got 3 out of their 10 goals, and 2020 World Cup was the third highest scorer in that tournament. So, a couple of good tournaments, but as you say, a bit of a checkered past, and now a bit of an injury concern, but we'll get to that later. Let's move on to Antoine Griezmann, who started 13 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for the 2 others, so little doubt about him.
Yeah, 109 caps for France and 42 goals is extremely impressive. Yeah. He spent pretty much his whole career in Spain. He was with Atletico Madrid, then went to Barcelona, is now back at Atletico Madrid, just on loan though. 30 years old, but has been a pretty consistent performer for them, and has been a regular starter in the last couple tournaments for them.
Yeah, no patches in his career. Since the 2014 World Cup, he's been a starter in all the tournaments, and we could go into details about the many good things he's done, but we'll keep it short here. Seems to be relied on as much now as he has been over the last 8 years. Kylian Mbappe, also a definite candidate, started 10 of their 15 games since the Euro Cup, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2, and a brief injury there, but he's been pretty consistent.
Yeah, young player, 23 years old, who really kind of broke out, I guess, at the 2018 World Cup, where he played a real starring role for them. He started as Monaco, but has been with Paris Saint-Germain since 2018. 28 goals already and just 58 caps for France. Very impressive.
Yeah, he seems to be maturing too. I remember in 2018, he was a bit of a showboater, but I don't get that vibe from him anymore. Do you?
No, not as much. I think he is maturing. I think a lot of young stars, you can kind of point to that when they were in their teenage years. Yeah. He's playing consistently well for PSG, and I'm sure a certain starter for the France team as well.
Yeah, he may have something to prove here actually, because he didn't score any goals in the Euro 2020, so I'm sure he'll be looking to rectify that here. Anyway, those are 3 of their steadiest players, especially Mbappe and Griezmann there. And an old soldier somewhat in Olivier Giroud. I wonder if he gets offended with that kind of representation, though. He started 4 of their games, Connor, including the last 2 of the 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was out with coronavirus and not selected for 9 others. So he whether it's fair or not, kind of is seen as a bit of an old soldier.
Yeah, definitely a veteran. I don't think it'll be too bothersome for him. He's also kind of been underappreciated in his career, but that hasn't stopped him from 113 France appearances, 49 goals, World Cup under his belt. So yeah, probably a slightly diminished role for him now, especially with the talent that France has up front. But he's still going strong, playing with AC Milan, where they helped them win their first title in a long time last season. And of course, has been with Chelsea, Arsenal, and won a surprise title with Montpellier in France about a decade ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's more at the club level where he seems to come in at the end as a substitute. But for France, he's been relied on a bit more as a starter. So in the, of course, in the earlier years with the 2014 World Cup onwards, he's basically been a starter. In the 2018 World Cup, he was subbed into game one and then gained a starting position. But in 2020, he was truly a substitute. But then I believe the last two September games, he's been a starter. Is that right?
I'm just checking now, and yes, that is correct. He did start both of them, and yeah, he seems to be really appreciated by his Didier Deschamps, the French national manager, who relies on him quite a lot.
I mean, for years he seemed like a substitute. It's a surprise to see him starting, but he just seems to go on forever. Quite a likable character too. Wissam Ben Yedder started one of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he subbed in for 4 and was on the bench for 6. So not selected for 4 matches, including the last 2. But we have him as a possible candidate. But given how much he's called up, maybe a likely candidate more as a substitute. But those last 2 games are a bit of a concern.
Yeah, definitely more a substitute role. He has just 19 caps since debuting in 2018. He played with Sevilla for a lot of years and Toulouse before that, but has been with Monaco in the French league since 2019.
Yeah, but the national squad, he's kind of been on the fringes as a substitute, as you say. He was not selected for the 2018 World Cup, but he was on that 11-man standby squad. And for the Euro 2020, he was just on the bench. So most of his caps, or all of his caps pretty much, have come in kind of qualifying games or substitute appearances. Randall Kolo Muani is our our second possible candidate. He got his first cap in September 2022, so just recently. He didn't start either of those games, but he was subbed in for both.
Yeah, he moved to defending Europa League champions Eintracht Frankfurt this year, moving from Nantes, and is 24 years old, so we may see more of him in future years.
Right. Okay. We have a possible but unlikely candidate in Anthony Martial. So he started just 2 of their 15 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2. But he wasn't selected for 8 matches, and then for the last 2, he was listed as injured.
Yeah, he struggled for form and playing time with Manchester United recently. He has moved to Sevilla on loan for the start of this season. But yeah, it definitely seems more on the fringes. He has 30 caps since 2015, but just 2 goals to his name.
Yeah, just 2 goals for a forward. So never really has brought it for France. And in fact, he's only been nominated to 1 tournament. That was the Euro 2016, where he appeared as a substitute twice. But one of those players just on the standby squad for the 2018 World Cup and was barely even a consideration by Euro 2020 based on form, but also he had been recovering from injury too. So very much on the fringes of the squad despite his 30 caps. Finally, we have Jonathan Ikone, and he last appeared for the team in September 2020, so very much an outsider there. You can tell us a little about him?
Yeah, so he was with Lille in France, part of their title-winning squad recently, but is moved to Fiorentina for the start of this season.
Great. Okay, so that is it for forwards, and we'll just kind of go through the position. Fortunately, it's a bit more stable than, say, the central defense or central midfielders. In fact, it's pretty much always Mbappe, on the left, Griezmann on the right, or as an attacking midfielder, and Benzema sometimes as a lone forward or in some combination of 2 or 3 forwards. Benzema tends to be the centre forward there, and generally it was 2 forwards during World Cup qualification. Benzema alongside Martial, he saw a couple of games. Diaby and Coman each played as a forward, and but generally Mbappe on the left and Griezmann on the right. So that combination of the 3 of them, in whichever formation it was, continued into the Nations League finals for 2020 and 21, and the Nations League finals for 2022-23. So there was some experimentation there recently in the Nations League games, but not as much as central defence and central midfielders. We saw that Giroud got a couple of starts there. Ben Yedder in what seemed something of a B team game, a bit of a strange lineup for their game in Croatia with a lot of B team players. They ended up tying the game, and we'll talk about their performance in the Nations League. Anything to add there on forwards, Connor?
Yeah, the Nations League games, even though they were moving players around in other positions, they did go with Giroud, Griezmann, and Mbappe for both games. So very strong lineups. And then we saw Ousmane Dembele, Nkunku, and Kolo Muani coming in as subs in those games.
Okay, those last September games, you mean?
Yes.
Right, okay, well, that brings us to the end of the player-by-player examination. And so we turn our attention to a discussion of the squad. And we'll start by kind of going back to our notes that emerged out of previous podcasts. And I don't think we need to say much about the first one. Do you want to just kind of take us through the titles, Connor?
Yeah, so no outstanding leader was 1 point.
Yeah, that was a takeaway from the general history, but we won't dwell on that here.
Poor in the 2022-23 Nations League was our 2nd point.
Yeah, do you want to talk about how they performed there?
Yeah, I mean, we are aware of their September games. They ended up surviving relegation, but just barely, and that was despite a loss to Denmark in their final game. Croatia and Denmark had 13 and 12 points. France had just 5 points from their 6 games, a point ahead of Austria, who had 4. So yeah, not a very good performance from them in the Nations League, and lost that final game to Denmark with fate in their own hands, but ended up surviving nonetheless.
Yeah, they lost both games to Denmark, which is interesting because they faced Denmark in the World Cup here. Yeah. And, after going through the players, we see that, especially in those last 6 Nations League games, there was so much mixing and matching, a lot of it brought on by injury, but that had to contribute to their poor performance, Connor.
Yeah, for sure. Injuries and just inconsistency in the lineup. It's hard to find partnership. It's hard to establish things. And again, that's by this time with these kind of warm-up games for the World Cup, that's what you want to be doing, finding established partnerships. So a little bit disruptive, and it almost cost them dearly with relegation, but they did avoid it.
Right. I think there was one more point from the takeaways.
Yeah, they were characterized by periods of strength and weakness.
Okay, well, we talked a bit about that at the beginning. I think the main point being that there is a bit of a danger for them following a good performance. They won the World Cup in 2020, but when they did so in 1998, it was followed by a poor performance in 2002, and 2010 was a poor follow-up to a finals appearance in 2006. Do you see that happening here, Connor? A bit of overconfidence, perhaps?
I don't think so, and hopefully France will have learned from their history. Deschamps, I think, has been around the club long enough, been there as a player, and perhaps on the wrong end of things as well. So I think this France team, even though they were a little bit disappointed with their Euros performance, I do think that they will be strong and will get out of the group.
All right. A couple of other general points.
Yeah, so one is, will France go with veterans or the shiny baubles that are their new players?
Well, they have a lot of shiny baubles for new players, and I don't really have an answer to this question. I suppose a lot of it comes down to whether these injuries are brought into the cup or not.
Yeah, and I think some of the veterans we mentioned, Benzema coming off a really good season, Giroud, playing an important part with AC Milan. Varane now kind of getting back into the Man United lineup. They have some veterans who are still performing at a high level. With France, you have so many players to choose from, and there's new players popping up all the time. So yeah, I think it's a question for Deschamps to manage. Veterans playing well, but lots of new players kind of always banging on the door.
Yeah, well, some of those new players were definitely brought in as injury replacements, so it wouldn't shock me, despite their incredible club affiliations, it wouldn't shock me to see them kind of discarded if the veterans return, especially those that just popped up in September.
Yeah. And then our final point is how will the many injuries be navigated?
We will follow up with an injury report and when they're due back. But it does seem certain that at least a couple of the definite and likely candidates that we talked about in the player-by-player section will be out for the Cup, and we'll come back to that. Okay, well, let's take a look at club affiliations. We've kind of talked about it through the player-by-player podcast, but any general comments other than wow, Connor?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be up there with the best in the world. And interesting, I think, and probably a strength of France is they're not just all from one country. They have top players in England, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. So they're well spread out, and I think that diversity probably helps them. But yeah, kind of if there's a big club, they probably have a French player on it.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it looks like a description of, say, the top 8 of the Champions League club. I mean, there are a couple of smaller clubs, if you want to call them that, like West Ham, Aston Villa, Reims, maybe not the top tier teams, but second tier teams. But even those are few and far between amongst, Real Madrid and Chelsea, Juventus and Bayern Munich.
Yeah.
To say nothing of Paris Saint-Germain, where they play for the top clubs in France as well. So again, my concluding summary there is wow. Okay, well, we've put together a couple of statistics on the squad itself. So it's kind of interesting that to consider how many players are kind of on the slate overall, and how many are kind of under serious consideration, and how many we have in the definite and likely category tells us something about the team. And Connor, we have how many on the slate overall?
Yeah, 57 in terms of players that have been called up since 2020.
Okay, well, that compares to an average of 51. So again, maybe because they brought in a lot of players to cover those injuries, it's a bit higher than normal. But they can only bring 26 to the Cup, so that means basically 31 of the players we've talked about here will have to go.
Yeah.
But we look at players under consideration kind of as the ones we had in the definite, likely, or possible category. How many of those are there?
We have 36, so I'd also imagine that's probably a slightly higher than average number.
Yeah, not as much as the total number of candidates, but it is quite high. So again, not dead sure what that stat means, except perhaps a headache for the coach who has to cut 10 of them.
Yeah, 10 at least, you'd think.
Yeah, I mean, it may be made a bit easier. I think, as we said, a couple of the definite unlikely ones may be cut because of injury. But wow, they have so many players to choose from. It's got to be a tough task for them to reduce it to 26.
Yeah.
Their average of definite and likely is actually kind of in range. So it's really just kind of the likely players or the players more on the outside. But that means, Connor, just room beyond these definite and likely players for just four of the possible players that we've talked about.
Yeah, 22 in that category. I mean, there may be some surprises, I suppose, but I think when they're healthy, which is obviously the big question mark right now, um, I think then they kind of know who their best players are. But there's a lot of experimentation, and we may get some surprises out of that.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think the injuries will end up throwing up a couple of surprises too. We've been looking at the average age of squads, and generally teams are between 25 and 27 years old. 26.7 is on the higher end.
Yeah, brought up by a few veterans, I would think.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that now, and they have a couple. Well, Steve Mandanda we had as possible, but he seems to be kind of going off the team. He's 37. Lloris is 35, and Giroud 35. Benzema 34, and in all they have about 8 players who are older than 30. Any comments on that? Do you think that's a negative?
I don't think in France's case, because a lot of those players that are over 30 are still playing at a high level for very big clubs. So in some cases, it might be a lack of renewal, but we know France has young players they can choose from. I just think they have veterans performing well. So I think that's good, and I think it's good to have some hangover from the last World Cup when they won it, because that experience should prove helpful.
Yeah, and as you say, they certainly have enough young players to replace them. They have 7 players who are 23 alone, or that may be 8, and then 5 players who are younger than 23. So most of those tend to be in the possible category, but they're certainly promising players.
Yeah.
Kylian Mbappe probably chief among them with 20. He's just 23 years old. I guess hand in hand with that is the number of caps, 32.5 on average, which is again slightly higher than most teams. The average I have among teams is 27. So again, kind of going along with that veteran. Any comments on that?
No, I think a lot of the points we covered in the age. They do have some veterans with some higher age, but a lot of caps, and that could prove useful.
Yeah. Do you see France as a particularly high-scoring team?
I do. Yeah, I think it's probably one of their strengths. I mean, they're strong all over the field, but we're talking about some of the attacking players who aren't starting or even on the fringe of the squad who would start for a lot of other countries. But yeah, a front 4, I guess. They only have room for 3: Giroud, Benzema, Griezmann, and Mbappe. That's goals wherever you look.
Yeah, that's right. Well, among my stats here, they are actually have the most goals. The average is 118, and they have 191.
Wow.
And sorry, I haven't been filling in the graphic on the YouTube here, so I'll just do that. But that works out to 5.5 goals per player, whatever that stat is worth. But that too is way higher than most other teams. It's Argentina who comes in next at 5.3. So teams well known for scoring. Just to give you a couple of percentages here, I'd say anything above 40 for a forward, 40% is a really good stat. And just looking at their top players here, we have Olivier Giroud with 43%. That is amazing over his long career. Antoine Griezmann and Karim Benzema both at 38%, and Kylian Mbappe at 47%. So just as you said, whoever they choose among those forwards, they're quite well known for scoring.
Yeah, that's amazing goal ratios among so many of their players.
Yeah. Perhaps a bit of a concern, though, is where they're getting goals among the other players, because the highest stat I see, there's really no one above 17%, except for Camavinga, surprisingly, who has 4 goals in 19 games, so maybe not enough games to really consider it a valid stat. But are you surprised by that, Connor? Kind of a low percentage among those non-forwards?
A little bit surprised, especially given some of the names. But I guess when you got forward scoring at the ratio that they have, I guess it's a little bit less important to be getting goals from elsewhere.
Yeah, well, certainly you're right. There's no concern with them not being able to score goals. Unlike Australia, who is in this group, who we're going to see do have a bit of a concern there. But let's move on to player issues to watch. Do you want to tell us maybe about some of the issues in defense?
So I guess starting at the goalkeeper position is Lloris's starting position under challenge, do you think?
What do you think?
I think probably not. He's still playing well for Tottenham. He's renowned as one of the best in the world, and he's captain. So he hasn't been in the last couple games, but I think he's their starter, and I don't think there's really any threat to that.
Yeah, in the player-by-player, we pointed out that he started only 2 of the 6 recent Nations League game, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of issue there. And so perhaps just giving those backup keepers a bit of field time. That's what I would guess.
Yeah.
This is next one's a real issue, though. What's that?
Yeah, too many central defenders.
Yeah, that comes down to the number of injuries they had, but it was really stable actually in the Cup and in the first part of World Cup qualifying with Kimpembe and Varane. But then they started introducing all sorts of players. And as I said in the player-by-player, those 2 September games featured 3-man backlines in both cases. The only player who played both games was a player introduced in September. Sorry, I'm just looking for the name here.
That was Daddy Ashili, I think.
Yeah, right. So he was introduced new, and then the other 4 were all different players. So things seem very uncertain at the back, and I don't think we can just put that down to injuries.
No, I agree. I think injuries have been a part of it, but I think they're trying to find the right formula. They didn't have a great Nations League campaign, conceded more goals than they would have liked. So I think it's a little bit of trying to get the right balance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a snake eating its own tail there, because did they perform poorly in Nations League because of the mixing and matching, or which one caused the other? Do you have an opinion?
I think if France can get back to their first choice, and I think both Varane and Kimpembe are part of that, that should add some stability. So, I think if they can call on the combinations they want, then that should lead to some improved performances. That's my feeling.
Yeah, well, that actually leads nicely into the third concern we have, or the third issue in defense.
Yeah, and that is, will veterans Dean and Pavard hold on to their positions?
All right, well, you talked about returning to the stability of Kimpembe and Varane in central defense. There are definite challenges to Digne as the right back and Pavard as the left back. Do you see it as wiser to going back to those veterans, Connor?
Possibly. I think it's a position where we're playing in a left wing back. It requires a lot of energy up and down. So it's kind of who can fill that role, especially if they do go with 3 at the back. So I think France has good cover in those positions. I don't think it's it's as big a concern. I don't think probably has a big of an impact on their defensive shape, who they put in there. So we may even see them rotate in the Cup potentially.
Yeah, good point. And about 2/3 of the time we saw that it has been a left wing back played by a left back. And that seems to be the preferred formation. Okay, let's move on to the midfield.
All right, so the first issue that we've identified is too many central midfielders.
Yeah, very much similar to the central defenders. Again, injury playing a role, but the same story, a lot of experimentation towards the end in those Nations League games, and did that lead to the poor performance? How much of a role was injuries in all of that?
Yeah.
So we won't repeat all that here, but then one other issue.
Yeah, and that's whether N'Golo Conte is losing ground.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if he's fully fit that they will want to use him, but that's a big question. He's had a lot of injury concerns. Do you think he'll be the starter?
I think what you said is correct. I think if he's fit, he will start. I think he's been an indispensable part of France in the past, but he is 30 now, and has been in and out of the squad, so that may open the door for replacement or someone new. I still think at this tournament, though, he would be first choice if fit.
Yeah, well, fitness is very important. I mean, he's famous kind of for being all over the field, and maybe, when a player like that hits their 30s, they don't have the energy to do it. And if fitness and injury is a concern, I wouldn't be surprised if he is losing ground. In the attack, we kind of have the same issue with.
That's is Giroud making a comeback?
Yeah, I guess that's not the same issue as Conte, but a veteran player who never seems to age to the point of being off the team. But do you see him as a starter?
I guess it does depend a bit on Benzema's injury. He started the last two, but Benzema wasn't there. I think Giroud is probably happy to accept any role. Obviously, I'm sure would like to be starting, but if he comes off as a sub, he's a heck of a good sub to be bringing on. If France need a goal, he's someone who's kind of, for club and country, always seems to come up with big goals.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll see when the cup comes around. But we have quite a bit of business here to do with new players and especially injuries, and not so much with notable absences. But we went through the bios of all these new players in the player by player. So we'll just kind of point them out by name here. Do you want to take us through that?
Sure. So in new players for goalkeepers, we have Alphonse Areola and Mike Maignan.
Right. We consider those two definite candidates, except Maignan is a bit of an injury risk, which we'll get to soon.
Yeah. In center defense, there's several. In definite, we have Jules Koundé and William Saliba. And then in possible. Yeah. We have Deo Upamecano, Benoit Badiashile, and Ibrahim Konate. Those are the center backs.
Right, and Jules Koundé and Ibrahim Konate are injury risks among those. And just a note, Jules Koundé often plays on the right as a right back rather than as a central defender, but does do both.
Yeah. Then we have Theo Hernandez, who's a likely candidate, and Ferland Mendy, who's possible. They're both newcomers in left defense. And then we have
Theo Hernandez, a bit of an injury concern there.
Yeah, sorry. And then in right defense, we have Jonathan Klaus, who we consider likely.
Yeah, likely. And all right, moving on to the midfield.
Yeah, we have a definite in newcomer Aurélien Tchouameni. He's a defensive midfielder. And then we also have Matteo Guendouzi as a central midfielder, a newcomer, but we consider him likely. And then as a secondary striker, we have Christopher Nkunku, the Leipzig player.
Right. So surprising, really, how many of those young players have made inroads into the squad.
Yeah, it is. Some opportunities. The position probably where they struggle the most with injuries, which is notably center defense, where I see the most newcomers. But yeah, it's a lot of names who will be pushing for the squad, or some that we think will be there already.
Right. Okay, well, injuries, maybe if you tell us who it is, and I can give an update or the latest on where their injury seems to stand.
Yeah, so first we have goalkeeper Mike Maignan.
Right, and again, he was a definite candidate. However, he's got a calf injury, but he is expected back on October 20th, as we said in the player-by-player. So not too much danger there.
Yeah, in center defense, we have Jules Koundé.
Yeah, and a definite candidate who plays on the right, perhaps even a little bit more than in central defense. He has an Achilles tendon problem, but he's expected to be back in time for the Cup. The return date is predicted as October 15th.
Yeah, then we have Lucas Hernandez in the same position.
Yeah, Lucas Hernandez was a left back for a long time, but is coded as a central defender, and usually in the three-man defense. We have him as likely, but he has a torn muscle bundle with no return date. I kind of feel like no return date is not good news, Connor.
Yeah, I agree. Especially with the tournament just kind of 2 months away.
Okay, I'm going to highlight him in red if there seems to be a serious risk of them not returning. And we'll be updating this in the November podcast, or in the November mediacast. So keep your eye out for that one. Pernell Kimpembe. Oh, you're introducing them. Sorry.
That's all right. I'll just repeat it then. Pernell Kimpembe. He's also an injury risk.
Right, we have him as a likely candidate, the central defender, and had a hamstring injury, which is usually kind of a long-term thing, but he is expected back October 24th.
Yeah. And then we have Ibrahima Konate, also in central defense.
Yeah, he was on the injury list, but the last time I checked, he wasn't. So he was out for the last 2 games. I can't remember. Oh, it was with a knee injury. But it's not on the injury list anymore. So perhaps we'll take him off the list here.
Yeah, on to the left defense, we have Luca Dean.
And do you know anything from your personal knowledge there? He has an ankle injury with no return date.
No, I don't have any additional information on his injury.
Okay, well, we have him as a definite candidate, but of course, only if he's fit. So a bit injury prone. Do you think, Luca Dean?
Tough to say. He may be. I'm not sure. He might need some more game time too, which would be a question. He hasn't played much for Villa this season.
Yeah. He's kind of been out with injury a few times. Okay, who's next?
Next we have Theo Hernandez.
Okay, Theo Hernandez. We again a likely candidate here, but I'm going to put Luca Dean in red there because that seems one of the more troublesome ones. Theo Hernandez would be his replacement, but he was injured for the last 2 matches, and he too has no return date on a muscle tear. So a bit of a desperate situation on the left back position there, Connor.
Yeah, a little bit for sure. Though it does open a door to Ferland Mendy in that position.
Yeah, right. And he played the last 2 games in September, so that could be a blessing for his career. God, that is 5 defenders. Are we done with defenders?
We are, but we'll move on to midfield, and we have some more injuries here, starting with Boubacar Kamara.
All right, well, he's out with a knee injury. We only have him as a possible candidate in the first place. He's expected back November 22nd, and not to put you on the spot here, but do you know when the first game or when the World Cup begins?
It's right around that time. It's kind of right around November 20th. So if he's just getting back and he's only a possible candidate, it might spell the end for him.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Adrian Rabiot. I'm stealing your lines again.
That's all right. Just as well, he's no longer listed as injured. So.
Okay, well, we won't even put him on the list. He was out with a calf injury for those September games, but fortunately, because he's a definite candidate, if he's no longer on the injury list. So let's move on.
Yeah, next we have Kingsley Coman.
We consider the right midfielder a likely candidate. And he doesn't have a return date with a hamstring injury. Oof. Doesn't look good, Connor.
No, not so good for him.
Yeah. Okay, and Are we done with midfielders? I think we are.
Yeah, just 2 forwards to mention as the list grows, beginning with Karim Benzema.
All right. Well, Karim Benzema was on the injury list. He's had actually a couple of injuries in the period that we examined, but no longer on the injury list. So maybe that means Giroud will go back to being a substitute. But Giroud did kind of replace him in those September games.
Yeah, and then finally we have Anthony Martial.
Okay, I'm going to take Karim Benzema off because he's not on the most recent list I saw. But Anthony Martial, also with no return date, but the diagnosis there is an Achilles irritation, which doesn't sound that serious, but sometimes niggles can be. What do you think?
It might just be uncertain too. Maybe they can't put a date on it. Again, he's someone that, kind of on the fringe of the squad. So probably doesn't help his cause. He probably need to be making a push to play regularly and very well to try and squeeze in. But yeah, the Achilles irritation will probably hinder that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think he'd have to have a good spell with Manchester United over the next few games to get in, and that doesn't really look likely. Okay, well, let's take a look at a few absences, and actually, we're going to kind of go back to the 2018 World Cup here, since some of our audience will basically follow teams from World Cup to World Cup. Do you want to take us through that, Connor?
Yeah, some of the names we mentioned and we gave their bios, so we'll just mention it by name. But we have Steve Mandanda, the goalkeeper.
Yeah, we still have him as a possible candidate, but quite a few players ahead of him, and he's getting old, even for a goalkeeper.
Yeah, next we have Kurt Zuma.
Yeah, we said Kurt Zuma missed the last 8 matches, so seems to be off the squad. But we do have him as possible, but unlikely.
Yeah, and then we have Samuel Umtiti.
Yeah, we said during the player-by-player that he kind of came in quickly and went out quickly, so had a good Euro 16 and 2018 World Cup, but hasn't played since September 2019.
Yeah, and then one other player we'll mention is Blaise Matuidi.
I mean, if I was following World Cup to World Cup, I'd kind of wonder where he was. He was a sub in the 2018 World Cup, but then gained a starting position, and he's a familiar name to me, but he wasn't even around for the Euro 2020.
Yeah, he's actually 35 years old and was with Inter Miami most recently. He has 84 caps for France, but yeah, none recently, so we have him as an absence.
Yeah, so all in all, that's not bad, Connor. They still have most of their big names still around.
Yeah, a lot of veterans nearing retirement, but not there yet.
Okay, well, let's finish by looking at who we think is going to be the starters. And basically, we won't try to define the substitutes, but anyone who's in the definite or likely category that we don't identify as a starter is probably going to be a substitute, because we have them as definite or likely to make the squad at least. So what do you think for goalkeepers, Connor?
Well, for goalkeepers, I think it has to be Hugo Lloris as the starter.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think Mike Maignan will be second if he's fit. And we should actually put Didier Deschamps as the manager as starter. We have 2 definite candidates, so they will probably be the backups. Do you see any central defenders as starters?
I mean, I think if they were healthy, there's a few I could put down and kind of look at also who played recently in major tournaments for them as giving some indication. Mm-hmm. They've used that 3-4-1-2 formation, probably being their most common formation. So possibly there's 3 to pick from. I would say that Raphael Varane and Presnel Kimpembe are probably the 2 most likely, and then would probably add Jules Koundé in as a third. But how do you see it?
Yeah, no, I agree with you in principle. I wouldn't be confident enough to say Kimpembe and Varane. They were the kind of the starting 2 for the Euro Cup, and in the first half of the games we examined, but they've been kind of off the team. So I'm just not confident enough to put them as starters. But I do think you named the top 3 candidates there.
Yeah, they're not the ones who played most recently, so that, like you said, that does add some variety. I'm probably not 100% confident on anyone, just given how what the situation's been.
Yeah, me too. In terms of starters, I think we've got probably five players there who will reach the final squad, but it'll kind of maybe come down to injuries or form or, I'm not really confident enough to nominate any of them.
Yeah.
How about left back?
I think there's a couple injury concerns to Digne and Hernandez, so I think Ferland Mendy, who played the 2 games in September, is probably the most likely to start at this point.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm not quite ready to highlight his name in green, but I think he could slide in ahead of the other 2 because of their injuries. Do you want to highlight any of those?
Tough to say because it depends who's going to be fit. So yeah, maybe it's best not to kind of stake a claim on anyone's name at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. How about on the right side?
I do see Benjamin Pavard as probably the most likely candidate, just partly because of the inexperience of some of the players behind him. So I would say Pavard would likely be starting at right back.
I'll go along with that. I actually think Koundé is kind of the backup in that position, and Pavard hasn't been playing as much recently, but he's one of the ones I'd be more comfortable with highlighting.
Yeah.
Defensive or central midfielders, usually the back 2, or usually the back 2.
Well, we mentioned it when we talked about midfielders, is that Conte and Pogba are probably the 2 most likely to start, even though they haven't been involved kind of consistently over the last several months. But what do you see? Do you see those 2 as starting, or do you see any newcomers kind of taking a spot?
We have Rabiot as a definite candidate, but he can play all over the field. So he might not be a central midfielder, but maybe on the right or even a bit more attacking. I agree with you about Conte and Pogba, but I'm just not confident enough that they just haven't started enough games recently enough for me to think that they're going to be a starter in the cup.
Yeah, we should mention that Tchouaméni started the 2 games in September. So that could be some indication if it is going to be someone else.
Yeah, that's right. He's the actually, among the candidates that we have here, I would say Tchouaméni seems to be the most likely starter now. Are you confident enough about that to highlight it?
Probably not him yet, just because I'm not sure about Pogba and Conte. But if you feel confident, then go for it.
No, I kind of agree with you. I think it depends on injury concerns and stuff like that. So we're not doing well here in nominating the starting squad. Any left midfielders?
I think given that we've seen they often play fullbacks in the left kind of winger position, I don't see any of the names we have as likely starters. They just haven't played enough regularly.
Yeah, me neither. We only have Ousmane Dembele as a possible candidate to reach the squad, so I wouldn't be nominating him as a starter. How about Kingsley Coman on the right midfield?
Yeah, we mentioned his big injury concern. So yeah, probably unlikely. To make the squad. So yeah, I don't see a starting position. But injuries again rear their ugly head.
Yeah, left wingers, and that's, as you said, usually played by the left and right back, and we weren't sure about those either, so we're really not doing well here. Right wingers, they don't even have any players nominated as a right winger, so we probably won't choose any of those, but I think we can do a bit better with the forward line.
Yeah, I think Mbappe and Griezmann are nailed on starters, and I would give Benzema the edge over Giroud if he's fit.
Yeah, given that he's not on the injury list, I'm actually ready to highlight him in green. Do you have any major objections to that?
Nope, not with Benzema.
Okay, well, a lot left up in the air. They certainly have a lot of great players to choose from, but none of them have really been playing regularly enough for us to nominate a lot of starters, except in the forward line, where we're quite confident about with starters. But it'll be interesting to see. Maybe we'll have a bit firmer opinion in the update podcast.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this podcast. That update podcast will be coming out probably in mid-November once the final rosters are published, and we'll talk about any developments on the team, especially with injuries when it comes to France.
Yeah, and meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website, soccerphiles.captivate.fm. And check the show notes for links to our website and previous podcast series.
All right, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.